of Seed and Soil, Unincorporated Voices of Food, Farming, and Freedom. We are happy to have you tuning into another episode. I am Sommer Sibilly Brown, your host. This podcast is a place where we explore the texture of what it means to be Virgin Islanders, people living in the Caribbean, discussing food and liberation. You will hear the voices of farmers, fishers, elders, healers, the people who are with the land and of the land, just talking about their experiences. So if this is your first time with us, thank you for joining us. And today I have with me the impeccable Hadiya Sewer, who is a professor, she's an author, she's my friend, and a St. Johnian, and I'm gonna let Hadiya tell you the rest of her story. Hi, Hadiya.
Hi, Sommer. I'll also just start by saying thank you so much for having me, but also thank you for all of the work that you do through VI Good Food to improve food security in the Virgin Islands. I just really admire and appreciate you, your work, your tenacity, but also the deep love and care that you have for the people of the Virgin Islands, and including me as someone who considers you a friend. And so with that, I'm Dr. Hadiya Sewer. I'm a St. Johnian, born and raised, as we love to say, as Virgin Islanders. I'm a philosopher by training, also a priestess, a devotional creative, a community organizer. There are many hats that I wear, but I'll say that one of my titles is that I'm president and co-founder of JanCo, the St. John Heritage Collective, and we understand ourselves to be a decolonial land rights and cultural heritage preservation nonprofit in the Virgin Islands. I'm also a founding member of the Virgin Islands Studies Collective, alongside Tiffany Yannick, Levant Bell, and Dr. Tammy Navarro. But I'll say that I do see myself and understand myself to be a daughter of the soil and somebody who deeply loves my home and is just obsessed with these larger questions of freedom, of sovereignty, of the human, and specifically, what are our possibilities, right, for liberation as people who were essentially born and raised in a colony?
So you and I talk all the time. Right. So I want to bring our listening audience up to speed because I feel like we are always in this conversation about liberation. And what I tell people about VI Good Food is VI Good Food is a liberation organization, right? Our vehicle is food. And I feel like my first introduction to you was understanding the resistance you were holding for liberation of St. Johnians being the right to have access to things like land, right? And so what role in how you articulate yourself does resistance play in who Hadiya is and what you want for St. John as a St. Johnian? Who you are born on St. John?
Well, like St. Johnians, we don't have a hospital on St. John. So I was born on St. Thomas, but of course.
No, because I'm trying to find the last people born on St. John, right? Because again, in having access to your home, that's important.
It is.
So anyway, we could yes. So resistance. That's where we were. How do we articulate resistance as a St. Johnian from your perspective?
From my, what's funny? I'll actually start in continental Africa and in East Africa specifically, because my paternal grandmother is Ethiopian. And so my father actually grew up in Ethiopia for a little bit before he moved back to the Virgin Islands to be with his Virgin Islands, quote unquote, side of the family. And there was just something about growing up with his nostalgia for a sovereign Black nation of his childhood in a space that was currently a colony of the United States of America that I just had a really hard and interesting time reconciling. And so I think I became really curious about St. John, in part by understanding the Caribbean in relation to continental Africa. And so I like to think sometimes that power is really about the ability to design and sustain worlds, and that being dispossessed is really living in a reality where you are constantly being asked to react to worlds that other people are creating, but you don't necessarily feel empowered to be able to design and to curate and to live in your reality. And so as a St. Johnian, it's like, wow, we are a colony of the United States of America.
Yes.
Over 2/3 of our island is occupied by the federal government in the form of the Virgin Islands National Park. We are dependent on tourism. But not only are we dependent on this like luxury tourism model, we also just have a brand that is really rooted in the plantation. And specifically thinking about, Anna Berg, Susanna Berg, Catherine Berg, all of the relics of the sugar plantation system and era, and also some of the nostalgia for the hierarchies that plantation systems create. I think all of that really shaped my childhood, my understanding from myself, like what I wanted in terms of my own freedom, my own sovereignty, and the possibility of freedom. But also we have such a history of resistance, right? So 1733 as a revolution against slavery, where the formerly enslaved Africans took sovereignty over St. John for about under a year, right? I think that is so profound, because when you compare their bold and early claim for freedom to our continuous colonial subjection, like I started having to wonder, like, okay, like who are we in relation to our ancestors? What do we want? Why? And are we doing what's necessary to be able to kind of take up the baton of this stage of our freedom movements?
So are we doing what is necessary? First of all, in like the first few minutes, I hope everybody on the podcast sees why I can talk to Hadiya Sewer forever, because it's not just the wealth and knowledge, right, that I want to highlight. It is the passion and fervor and like I feel like genuine curiosity, right? Like the grappling with like what is happening here, and here's what I understand, and here's what I've seen, and here's how I feel, and like you do that so well. And the question of, are we doing enough? And it's interesting because in the food movement we talk about food sovereignty, but I don't believe that food sovereignty happens in isolation without the whole conversation of sovereignty. So bringing in the nostalgia that your dad had for like what it feels to be part of a sovereign Black nation. I think people also overlook that we are the only territory, the only unincorporated voice that is primarily of African descent.
Correct.
So we are the only
Black colony.
Black colony, right? Every other colony is indigenous, or has indigenous roots. And so I feel like we've experienced that colonization differently, and nobody's talking about it. And I will circle back because now my brain is like going in 10 million different spaces. But like in your ability as a St. Johnian to begin to grapple with, hey, what's happening here? Are we doing enough? Where did you land?
Wow, that's such a big question.
Yeah, I mean, you'll be back, right? But just in this moment, like, where did you land on if we were doing enough?
I'm gonna be honest, I had to learn how to be softer. And I say that because if you had asked me this exact question 5 years ago, I would say we're not doing enough. We keep hesitating in the face of the political status question. We have so much corruption. We have all of these issues. We're being displaced. We're not addressing that correctly. And I would just tell you, a younger version of me would tell you all the things that I think we have done wrong, right? And I feel like there's just something about age and like empathy, where you start to ask yourself like a different set of questions. And I think for me, it's less at this time about whether we're doing enough, and perhaps a little bit more about how can we continue to be more responsible, ethical, open-hearted. How can we design and inhabit worlds that can allow us to move through? And I think that if we haven't done enough yesterday, it doesn't mean we can't do enough today or get up tomorrow and do enough. And I think that a part of the challenge to doing good political work is this question of love. And I know people get tired of hearing me say that, but I actually think that in order for our political work to be sustainable, in order for us to be able to say, okay, we're going to fix our healthcare system, fix our education system, address land rights issues, face the ecological crisis head on, we each individually and collectively have to learn how to institutionalize love, how to center love, how to allow love to be our guide and to be our frame. So the short answer is maybe we haven't done enough, but that's okay, because there are always more possibilities for today and tomorrow.
So what I appreciate is you inviting the softness, because I think a lot of what is going to, this is me forecasting, right? This is me going into the future as we have this podcast and we talk about episodes, the different episodes. I think one of the things I ask people is like, what's pissing you off? Like, where, where is the challenge? And right at the very front of this, you're like, well, the challenge is, I think we need to be softer with each other. I think we need to love each other more. I think we need to see our potential to do better or different things. And I'm like, I was thinking about a very practical thing. Like, how does a St. Jonian get food? And where does the principle of like this softness, how could it improve or change that? So like, you live on St. John. What is your food situation? Like, what is the you know what I mean? Like, do you have to, I don't know. I'm like, do you have to go on to St. Thomas on a boat to go to, like, how do St. Jonians grocery shop to the best of your ability based on your lifestyle?
Yeah, like the wider Virgin Islands, we of course import over 90-something% of our food. And so once it gets to the Virgin Islands, it still have to get to St. John. Things have to come over on the ferry in order to be able to be in our stores. Our stores on St. John are typically smaller than in St. Thomas and St. Croix. And so we pay a little bit more for like the extra transportation, but also just for some of the drives of the market, right? And I would also say that with that being said, it's shifted so much, I think, over the last few decades.
Tell me more.
Yeah, when I was younger, we had so much food in our yards collectively. I think in the aftermath even of the establishment of the Virgin Islands National Park, like one of the impacts of having so much of the land on island being occupied by a federal entity is that over the years, a lot of the subsistence farming declined and people were pulled into the wage labor market, specifically into government jobs and into the tourism industry. And so we see the shifts rippling throughout the years. And in my childhood, I would say that there's like a good bit of backyard food, you could still be able to get. I had an uncle who used to farm. I had a lot of extended family members who had small farms to some extent. But that isn't as prevalent as it used to be. And I would also say that now I have a lot of food in my yard and I'm really proud of it. We got mango, we got papaya, we have soursop trees, we have herbs, we have tomatoes. And so I do think that there is this revitalization effort that's happening in our way of our like backyard gardens and our subsistence living. But that is really, I think, what the reality kind of looks like at the moment.
So when I go to St. John, my first time realizing that St. Jonians are like doubly, we claim, we're like, oh my God, we're so food insecure. We import 98% of our food. The first time I realized that is when I went to St. John and I paid double the price for a bottle of water, right? Like, in Red Hook, it was like a Fiji bottle is $3.50, and in St. John, it was like $7 or $5. And I was just like, whoa, this is, look at how much the cost went up. So I was like, how do everyday St. Johnians afford food and afford to live here? And I didn't notice, so I want to say, when you name, because I've only known St. John to be, 70% national park? Is 70 or 80?
Over 2/3.
Right?
But the number shifts a bit. Yeah.
I was just like, okay, that's how we know it. I don't live on St. John, so when you use the word occupied, right, that it helps me. No, literally. And so I'm looking at the camera because I want people to kind of take that in. I don't live on St. John, so I don't have a St. Johnian experience of not having access to so much of the land that I live on and that my people come from, and where I'm raising my children, where my, where we go send people to school. Like, I'm not pigeonholed into certain parts.
Right.
At least not federally pigeonholed into certain parts of my island. And so when you use that word occupied, it brings it alive for me, because I was like, oh, so you mean, and I really don't know this, so I'm genuinely asking, you mean if they have a part of St. John that have a bunch of like wild mango trees, right? But if that is on federal land, you just can't go, or you shouldn't just go and pick it? Like, how much control? Like, you just can't. And do they allow fruit trees on the land? Like, I'm so curious now of like what that means.
These are all good questions, because I think that because the park is so large, it almost feels nebulous in the sense that I remember Crystal Fort Wrangler in her scholarship, she would refer to St. John as like a park island. And I actually think for me that was really useful framing, in part because usually if you go to a national park elsewhere in the United States of America, you almost like enter the park. And once you enter the park, you know that, okay, I am within park territory, right?
Correct.
But because so much of our island is Virgin Islands National Park, it's a very different experience. You don't feel like you're entering the park. You feel like the entire island is this very fluid blend between the park and between like our residential and commercial areas. And so with that being said, there's just almost even a certain level of policing and oversight, right, that the park system has but doesn't have. And so if there are fruit trees within the park, or I know specifically the park has the only hagua tree that I'm aware of.
What kind of tree?
There's a fruit called hagua. I don't know if I pronounce it correctly to people across other areas that also have it.
I've never heard of it. So again, knowledge.
It's something that when you cut open, it oxidizes blue. And so it creates a bit of a blue dye. And I just really love it because historically it's very special to indigenous people. To some extent, what do you mean by inkberry?
So we have an inkberry tree that we use as a Crucian Christmas tree. It creates blue ink. It's like its seed looks like, I don't even know how to explain it. Oh. But maybe it's the same tree. We should find that out.
Maybe we should swap pictures at some point because the fruit of agua it's bigger. Okay. And when you cut it open, it seems pale. I actually think it's so magical because if and when I rub the fruit onto my hands, you look at it for a second and it looks clear, but then like you go sleep or you wait for like a couple of hours and then all of a sudden your hand is like this really deep indigo. But either which way, it's the only trees like that I know of on St. John are within the park. And so they don't overly monitor every area simply because logistically they can't. But the park is also a bit militarized in its own way, so they do kind of like police park waters, police parking, make sure things are efficient in certain ways. And so, yeah, there's some oversight, but not total control.
So I have another question, and I feel really really uninformed, or like, I want to use the word disconnected from, like, the Virgin Islands is St. Thomas, St. Croix, St. John, Water Island. We have other keys, Hassel Island, right? All the other ones that are involved, but like the 4 main islands. And to be born and raised here, right, I feel like I have some understanding of what it means to be a St. Thomian, right? I've spent time, I've lived there for a short period of time. My family's from there. But like, I don't have that same understanding of St. John. And so like, I'm wondering how many other Virgin Islands there's really understand what it means to be a St. Johnian, and to live through that blended piece. Because now I'm like, so beach access with the places of parcels of land that actually belong to the park, right? Like, how is that hindered or not hindered for St. Johnians? Because we talk about our residential areas and people cutting us off from the water here on St. Croix, and like that every place should have that beach access pass. Is that true for the park too?
So our park beaches are mostly accessible, so we can generally get to them pretty easily. Only, I think, one of them, there's a price for access during the day. But I think in some ways, and this is why I always find that the question of conservation is like so interesting. As critical as I find myself being of the park often, one of the things that I have to admit is that it has also protected and hedged against a particular type of privatization and development. And so that is one of the benefits, that we do have a particular ease of access to like a lot of our beaches, because we don't necessarily have to negotiate entry with quote unquote private developers or individuals.
Do you think it impacts fishermen?
It absolutely does, especially because I feel like so much of the park's presence also just impacts our ability to fish, to forage, to hunt. And I feel like we often don't have enough conversations about the specificity of that. But there are regulations, and I think that that's something that we find ourselves realizing that that's also just like one of the impacts of the park.
So this is so like, because I don't talk to Hadiya all the time, right? I talk to Hadiya all the time. I'm telling the people in the camera because Hadiya knows that I talk to her all the time. But like, every time is like a different layer, right? And to me, that's the importance of this podcast, is like getting to the layers and the complexity that actually is living one on an island, that is a territory, that is unincorporated in many states, and like, where is the resistance and what are the stories, and how can we become better, and also now softer. I'm often not soft, and as you was like saying, there's a benefit to the park, like I feel like you presented, that's like an emotional maturity to see the duality of the thing. Here are the things that we don't have access to. Here are the ways this is a barrier. Here is a way this is a benefit, right? So I just want to name, like, look at the ability to look at a situation from two sides while we are new world building.
Right.
That is like in the first intro that I ever did for this show, right? I say that I believe in the ability of voice and storytelling to grow new worlds. So the fact that you are referring to new world building, one, is comforting to my heart and soul, but two, I feel like that's the general conversation and the direction we should be having and using this platform for. New world building, how do you imagine it or see it? Like, when a person is building new worlds, right? We're here designing new worlds together. What would we be doing if we were designing new worlds where food and farming and freedom and access and all the things, the liberation that we're seeking, but maybe cannot completely name yet? What should we be doing?
Oh, I love this, especially because I feel like there's like a list, right?
There's a list?
There's a list. One, I would say, I think we need love, we need care, we need empathy. But two, I feel like we need knowledge. And I feel like sometimes that knowledge, we see it in a very academic, data, evidence, research type of way. But I think that there's also the knowledge that's community driven, and that's like the knowledge of like our ancestors and those who came before us. So there's so much food system knowledge in like our bloodlines, in our families, in our communities, that we also need to do the work of stewarding. Land also has to have some level of accessibility and affordability in order for people to be able to use it to produce food, right? And so there's a big, especially on St. John, affordability question that we have to address. If over 2/3 of the island is national park, if we have many villas, and if we are prioritizing income producing uses for our properties when we are privileged enough to have them or to have access to them, right? Then how do we actually make agriculture and farming on St. John sustainable fiscally, you know? And so being able to address that, I think, is something that's really important. And then also, I like local food. And I think that some of this is just a question of like, you talk about this all the time, but decolonizing our palates, right? What kind of food do we like? You know, how much of our local food is actually going into the stores and our markets? How many of our kids are getting to see the absolute joy of sucking a mango dry and then planting it and seeing the future mangoes from the seed that they ate and then planted, right? So sharing that love and that care for the earth and for food production is important. And then we also just have to see it as a part of like our sovereignty, right? How you going to be sovereign in any real fundamental way if you are overly reliant on food and resources from your colonizers? But
also, so you said two things that took me back to past conversations and experiences we had together. So I want to frame, as you were talking about how the food ties to sovereignty. At the Visco Decolonial dinner in which we hosted together this year, a young man stood up at the end. Remember, we're in the middle. And he was talking about the way we view wealth, right? And him understanding that wealth was having access to certain fruit trees and food just in his yard, right? And so like, that was like, yeah, and everybody kind of was like, yeah, you know, everybody at the dinner, but like in a larger way, helping our communities begin to reframe what it means to be wealthy. And I am in no means saying that money is not a part of that, right? So let me be clear, because some people hear that and it's like, she's one of the people who don't think people should have money,
right?
Or someone who is promoting what others view as I don't even know how to say it, right? But not nice things. I believe people should have nice things. I like nice things. I'm not against luxury. I'm not against, you know what I mean? I too want the luxury vacation. And I also understand that that is not the only thing that makes a person wealthy, right? So we're in this new world building. When you were talking, this is where like, where do we get to define how, you know, we define our wealth and economy systems and what we understand that to be, and get to integrate food in it as well, and food access as a priority, right? Just like the ecosystem services that are provided to us. And that term I got from a leader in Puerto Rico, Cynthia from La Maragnac, because I want to give her credit. I never used that before. But like the ecosystem services like trees, shade, fresh air, good topsoil, all of those things also are a version of wealth. That when you were talking, I was like, too, in this new world building, on the list, we get to put reimagining or imagining a new way, right? We could go back and pick up trade or other barter, or we could create something completely new, and it don't have to be what it is, but who's going to be the people who are up for that?
Right.
That's the question.
I I think all of us. And also, I had to tell people, hey, me, but remember, I'm an optimist.
Okay. All right.
Yes.
Noted.
Right.
Noted.
Keep in mind, I am a silver lining person. I'm an optimist. I believe in possibility. And so I'm a person that you can't tell me nothing is impossible. You just have to tell me that we are still figuring it out, right? And so with that being said, I want to say it was Malcolm X, if not Malcolm X, and or Frantz Fanon, who each have quotes that say a version of people can understand and embrace like anything insofar as you are willing to teach them and insofar as you are willing to meet people where they are. They each have, I'm blending their thinking here, right? Mm-hmm. But the premise, the fundamental idea of this is that sometimes we like to look and say, oh, you know, people ain't gonna go for that, or people don't know better, or this and that. And I'm just like, actually, I think people are really brilliant and beautiful and smart. And if we just hold each other with a little bit of care and meet each other where we actually are, then we can do the beautiful and difficult work of translating why this is actually important and healthy and a good experiment for all of us to engage in collectively.
So I need you to tell me that again. People are inherently what, and what?
I think I said beautiful, intelligent, and smart.
So I'm gonna confess that I often think the opposite, and I don't consider myself a pessimist, but I don't just be like, how not smart are you, right? So when you said that, I was like, oh my God, someone check yourself. You have like Hadiya's like reminding you, right? Like not in optimism, but in possibility. Mm-hmm. To believe in the power of people to make good choices if they have the right access to experience and information and the conditions are correct.
Correct.
And so far too often, I'll use me, I won't talk about anybody else, but if I do it, I know other people do it. Mm-hmm. It's much easier to be like, how dumb are you? How you didn't get at you? Like, you know what I mean? Like, oh my God, I'm so frustrated with this leader because that leader now is appearing not smart, not brilliant. I'm not leading with love. I'm leading with my limiting belief and my anger that maybe I had an easier, better solution and you're an idiot because you didn't provide it.
Yeah.
Not being complicit in, or not checking my complicity in saying, how am I part of sharing information, creating experiences, or even evaluating the conditions that, the ones where I can contribute to give people more opportunity to step into their brilliance.
Right.
So I can just confess, yes, I am one of the people who be like, oh my God, that was so dumb.
And you're not alone, right? We all have moments of being like, wow, that was stupid. But I think it was Malcolm X who said that there was a time when you didn't know what you know now. And
True.
I really try to hold that really tenderly because there was a time when I was dumb. I might be dumb tomorrow. Mm-hmm. And I hope that somebody looks me in the eye with some grace and holds me by the hand a little bit and be like, Hadiya, stop being stupid. It has some resources to do better. But also, here's the level of care and empathy and like witnessing that you need in order to be able to feel safe and in order to be able to change. And also, I like to nerd out sometimes on like a lot of...
No, you nerd out? Tell me more.
Yeah, well, I think that I am somebody who is fascinated by like all the neuroscientists online and like all of the research that comes out. And when I look at the research, I'm just like, wow, changing is hard. You know, like your whole subconscious, your body, your memories, everything in you is sometimes resistant to transformation. And so when we acknowledge this on like the personal level in terms of like personal development, imagine trying to do that at scale for like a wider society, right? And so with that being said, I think if we could acknowledge that, hey, our entire bodies and emotions and subconscious sometimes are working against our desire to transform, then we can recognize that at the collective level, that's also happening. And we can give ourselves some grace, but also some support, some systems, some accountability to incentivize the adjustments that we have to make in order to transform and to do better.
So I'm going to repeat what I think I hear you saying because I want people to hear this clearly. And then I'm going to drop my 2 nerdy words at the end because I want to feel smart with Hadiya. But no, what I'm hear you saying is like on a cellular level, right? My body, this body that I'm in, has learned certain ways of being to survive, right? It knows how, we call it homeostasis, right? My body has learned that this is how I keep balance and equilibrium, and its job is to keep summer alive, and this is how I keep summer alive. In that, I've also had certain experiences that my subconscious has conditioned myself to be able to survive, right? So these are the knowns. My body is now operating off of the knowns. When you throw an unknown, even though that unknown could be a positive unknown, my cells, the physical Summer, and my psyche, the subconscious Summer, they're stretching and trying to recreate the known because that's the system it knows how to be balanced in.
Right.
Don't mind this new system could be better or more helpful. It still is a new system, and my cells have to adapt and iterate. And so for a long time, it's resisting adapting while it's either changing, but this first layer is to resist the new thing, even though it's a good thing, because it's operating off of known conditions and experiences, both on a physical level and a psychological level, right? So you're saying this is happening for every human being every day as they encounter new situations.
Right.
Much less when we move as a collective community of Crucians, St. Thomians, St. Jonians, Virgin Islanders, right? So if that's the resistance that's happening here, like just think about what it means when we introduce new systems or new ideas, even though it could be better for all of us. That wall of resistance probably going to be pretty strong.
It is.
Right? Hence why we could be in some of the same problems or some of the same solutions. We're in a cycle, right?
Yeah.
Because it's a different type of resistance that we can't actually figure out. So now Summer, who's not the optimist over there calling people stupid, because I feel like how we end up here again. And we see it online, we see it in social media, how we end up in the same problem again. Yeah. This is definitely a different view on how we engage in change and transformation. And the time and the conditions. You said something at the end about safety, feeling safe. And I want to highlight that because I go to a juice bar and I get fresh juices and I'm trying to get my health and my life together. And the chiropractor, Dr. Micah, when we were talking about the mechanisms that put your body in starvation mode, she was like, Summer, in order for you to release this weight, I actually need you to eat. Yeah. She's like, I don't need you to deprive yourself of anything. I need you to have healthy sugar. I need you to have healthy salt. And I need you to have healthy fats. And she was like, she explained to me, like, your body craves, you get hungry because your heart needs sugar shunted to it so it can do its function. She's like, you need salt in your food, right salt, because salt unlocks your body's ability to absorb nutrients. So she was like, I'm going to feed you these specific drinks and I would like you to eat this food in a certain way so that you can feel safe for your body to release the things that doesn't serve you. So it was, when you said that, like everything you were saying kind of tied into the physiological things that she was talking to me about changing my body so it can be healthier, because she's like, if you starve it, it's not going to let any of the fat go because its function is going to be like, we have to shut down and protect you. Right. So we're going to hold on to everything because we're panicking. So, yeah, you said we need to feel safe. Yeah. I'll double down on the fact that I think you're pretty smart.
Oh, I would also say that was such a brilliant, detailed, explanation. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right.
I was repeating what you said, but I'll go with it. I'll take it. I'm absolutely right. No, but I hope, people listening to the podcast really get something from that, because I think it's important, because what I also heard you talking about was systems of grace, right? There's reasons why we should be graceful. Yeah. It's not because you're being graceful because this person made a mistake and you giving them grace. Right. Grace is actually a subset of change.
It is. And grace is divine. I do a lot of spiritual work as well. And one of the things that I find myself thinking about a lot is like the role of grace in like a lot of our religions and our spiritual practices. I think we think that sometimes grace is something that we extend into somebody because like we helping them, but we better than them, or we are taking pity on them. But grace and love are deeply entangled. It's almost as if grace is not something that you have to earn. Grace is not something that you are deserving or not deserving of. Grace is what is merely extended to us by the divine. Grace is what is extended to us by whether you would talk about God or our ancestors or our orishas or our angels. At the end of the day, grace is a key feature of our existence. And I think when we come into form, when we get these bodies and we get an identity and we come into our family and we go through this very human journey, we start thinking, oh, some people are deserving, some people aren't, because
we're all deserving.
We're all deserving. We all deserve grace. And grace doesn't just have to be a religious concept, right? It should be secular. It should be political.
So I'm going to say that to our listening audience, you all are probably wondering what all of this have to do with food, farming, and freedom, right? But these are the layers, I believe, of new world building and food system liberation that have to be explored. And so I'm going to ask you one last question as we wrap up. With all the things we just explored, if you could tie it to what you believe is possible, probable, or even what you want to imagine as it relates to food or farming on the island of St. John, what would you wish? What would your magic stroke be?
I would wish, of course, for sovereignty and for self-determination. I would wish for a food system where we incorporate the knowledge of our ancestors and those who came before us, as well as the most innovative and recent research. I would also wish for us to have like an intimacy with like our food systems, for food to be local, for it to be in our backyard, for us to quote unquote no longer import over like 98% of our food, but for as much of our food as possible to be able to come from our local region. I would imagine profitable food systems, environmentally sustainable food systems. These are all of the things really that I think about when I imagine food sovereignty. And I'm excited about this future. And I'll say I'm excited about it because, I don't know, sometimes people talk about change making like the freedom we seek is impossible or unlikely. And I'm just like not one of those people. I'm just like, you guys, people were enslaved on our islands, and emancipation probably seemed impossible at one point. And if you look at almost every period in history, every system of oppression, we always think that it won't end. We always sometimes feel like the empire that we are living under is going to survive forever. And I am just like, no, actually, that's not the case. And so I think we get to step up and design the worlds that we desire to inhabit. And I just, always pray and hope that those worlds are more loving.
Well, with all the love in our hearts, we want to thank you for tuning into this episode of Seed and Soil. And we want to encourage you to step into new worlds, right? We give a charge at the end. We will tell you thank you. We want you to like us. We want you to subscribe. We want you to watch every episode. We want you to follow us on Facebook, VI Good Food Coalition. And we want you to go out into your life and live this with joy and love. So go find a farmer, spend $5 to $10 at that farm. Tell them they should watch this podcast too, because this podcast is about them. And if Hadiya had a specific charge, if you have a young one, let them eat a mango, suck it dry, and go and plant it in the ground so we could leave mango for the next generation. Thank you so much for tuning in. See you on the next episode.